Welcome to the broadcast, my dear fruits. The King's beloved daughter-in-law. You know the one? The beloved one. She emerged in royal purple today, after joining the family for a birthday soirée last night. But from royal to thoroughly disloyal, the King's dreaded daughter-in-law. You know, on the one hand you have the beloved, on the other end of the lollipop, the fuzzy side, you have the dreaded daughter-in-law. Well, she also made a coy little appearance in the Duchessdom of Montecito. Here she is. Isn't it glorious? Isn't it wonderful? Oh dear. How shabby. Well, we shall take a little peek at that later on. And the latter segment of today's broadcast is going to be covering weightier issues such as the Middle East and the government and things of that nature for those of you that wish to hang around for that. But we shall begin with more light-hearted matters of royalty. And as I said, the Princess of Wales thrilled at the Shaping Us National Symposium today at the Design Museum. She presented findings of new research from her Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood. She was immaculate, wasn't she? Professional, regal, as she is every single time. This gal doesn't stop. She just keeps on going like a juggernaut. The only thing that I wasn't keen on is that she was referring to humankind. And I thought, oh dear, in place of mankind. Catherine, really? Is it really necessary? Who is writing your speech? And if it's you, you need to have a word with yourself, my dear. There's nothing wrong with the word mankind. We don't need to go reinventing that particular wheel. There is man, there is man. And the word mankind encompasses both. Humankind. Honestly, what is this, an Oxfam commercial? No, my dear, it's just not royal and not necessary. Don't start slipping down that slope, because the trouble is, my dear, once you start, you will never be able to stop trying to appease everybody, because someone else will have something to say and you'll go on offending other types. Only humans? What about aliens? What about plant species and microbes? This is the kind of slippery slope that leads to. So don't slide down it, Catherine, my dear. Stay royal. I had a bit of a grumpy morning because I woke up to two catastrophes, domestic catastrophes. Last night I had reason to turn my kitchen appliances off, and they were only supposed to be off for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, but I forgot to put them back on because it was quite late in the evening. I went to bed and I woke up to a warm fridge and a freezer that was dripping puddles. So I was down on bended knee, mopping up the puddles, and then I decided I didn't want to bother with the milk because it wasn't in a cold fridge anymore. So I trundled down to the coffee shop. That was shut. Trundled on to another one, got a coffee, brought it back and promptly spilt it all over my brand new rug that I told you about. Yes, my enormous brand new rug. And I wasn't particularly precious about the rug. It's second hand. Well, they call it vintage or antique, but a second hand Turkish Uşak rug. Very nice and pretty, very pale, kind of creamy beige Anatolian style rug. And I was absolutely devastated, as you can imagine. Fresh coffee all over it. So again, I was down on bended knee. And I was even more grumpy because I didn't have my coffee. And I didn't really want to trundle back to the shop. But I had to get on with cleaning up the mess. So dabbed it all up. Had nothing in the house that I usually have for these kind of stains and worries. Bicarbonate soda, white vinegar, all the rest of it, my dear. I know all the tips and tricks, but I didn't have it in my usual supplies. So I ended up using, after I'd daubed everything up with sponges and this kind of thing and used a bit of water and detergent, I used makeup brush cleanser that you can get in little squirty bottles. I used that and mixed it in with some water, and I started scrubbing the rug with the toothbrush. It's quite a hardy sort of rug, not one of those fluffy rugs with the toothbrush. I really got in there scrubbing. And I ended up with 2 blisters on the end of my fingers from the scrubbing as well. So, dripping fridge, ruined rug, blisters on the fingers. Yes, that's how my day started, my dear. And no coffee. Well, I did eventually trundle back because I was going to have that coffee come hell or high water, my dears. Yeah, that's the kind of morning I had. So it was actually quite a tonic to see Catherine in purple emerging and doing her royal duty. And she looked fresh as a daisy despite partying at Clarence House. She wore an emerald sequined gown in recycled polyester to the King's soirée, diamond earrings. The Prince of Wales was at the wheel on driving duty, and they were seen departing just shy of midnight before they turned back into pumpkins. And there's our dear Lady Susan. Doesn't she look ravishing? Lovely to see her. They were joined by Princess Beatrice, the Tyndalls, Lady Sarah Chatto, with a little starburst to the ear. And here is Sarah, the Queen's companion, looking rather glamorous. Lovely to see her. Hello, Sarah. Penny Natchball. Yes, there were lots there. Lots of friends and family and loved ones. And it topped off a busy day of service after a busy week, with the King's Charities rebranded from the Prince's Trust to the King's Trust, and the Prince's Foundation to the King's Foundation. It was the official launch of the Coronation Food Project, which is designed to tackle the dual problems of food that people can't afford and surplus food, wastage going into the millions of tonnes. Their Majesties visited a surplus distribution centre in Oxfordshire, and the King paid £10 for a copy of the big issue from a charming vendor by the name of Kelvin. A reception was held at Buckingham Palace to mark the 75th anniversary of organisations of the same vintage as the King, including the NHS with 400 nurses and midwives in attendance. The centrepiece of Remembrance Week was the Cenotaph service, and it saw the King, supported by other members of the royal family, leading the nation in remembrance. More than 10,000 veterans and serving members of the armed forces gathered to lay wreaths and observe the national silence. The royal family attended the Festival of Remembrance at the Royal Albert Hall, where new statues were unveiled of the late Queen Elizabeth and the late Duke. The King's equerry, Johnny Come Lately, was coming up the rear. Whoops-a-daisy. The Queen planted a cross of remembrance at Westminster Abbey at the 95th Field of Remembrance, and there were some lovely interactions there and some nice photographs. But now we turn to the Queen of Montecito, the Duchess of Doom, who has smiled on a girl's day out. Oh, how fun. This time with one of her besties, Kelly McKee Zadgfen, looking happy and relaxed. How lovely. All teeth and legs. All teeth and legs she is. And those legs look like Harry's legs. Don't you think, my dear? They've got the same legs, those two. They've got the same legs. Perhaps Harry's are slightly more feminine. But, and I'm not sure who's got the hairiest, but they've got the same legs dangling there. How sweet. Flaunting those pins she is. Flaunting those pins. Where is her stress patch? This is what I'm curious about. You know that sticker thing that she had on the wrist that she oh so surreptitiously allowed us to glimpse? Where's her stress patch? Are those anxious days over? Or is it one day on, one day off? They ate Italian, and then they shopped at the Wendy Foster boutique, another one of Maggie's faves. And she had the temerity to wear a poppy brooch, marking our Remembrance Sunday. Darling, you do not represent this kingdom any longer. You might think you do. Your husband might think that he does, you know. He might think that he has leave to prowl about as if he is commander-in-chief. No, dear, that's your father and your brother's destiny. Yes, Big Willie will be commander-in-chief in the future. You are a private citizen of Montecito, so stop swanning about in poppies. Don't make such a vulgar display of it as if you're the poppy fields outside Emerald City, because we're not going to sniff that kind of opioid matter, that toxic opioid matter. Poppycock is what they call it. Poppycock. You don't buy it. You don't give a shit about Poppy Day. Love a girl, you don't give a shit. The shades were by Celine. The belt, Givenchy. The manicure was red. The tote bag is made by a company famed for its social and ethical impact, and they go on a great big diatribe in all the media about how fabulous they are to buy for. You're doing something really good for the world and the environment if you buy this tote. It is so ethical and so pure that Meghan, you can stash your blood diamonds in there. You can stash some of your billions in there. Your private jet tickets. All kinds of things in there. Totally guilt-free. Totally guilt-free. Isn't that lovely? She's probably got a ripped-up copy of the Sandringham Summit Agreement in there, lurking in its confines. And from what I've been reading, Invictus is in trouble, I'm sad to say, because it's a very worthy cause. But from what I hear, there are all kinds of nasty things going on behind the scenes, and it's in a lot of trouble, Harry's baby. The oh-so-capable, oh-so-efficient Harry, who just knows how to run the show. Well, we're going to see how that pans out in the coming days and weeks. And speaking of that dozy boy, you might have heard all these rumours emanating about a call between Prince Harry and King Charles. The BBC were among the first, if not the first, to report that the King would be receiving wishes in a call from Harry. That was the intention. And I might add at this point that for the BBC, that is inappropriate speculation as far as I'm concerned. For a world news service to be parading this tittle-tattle about a completely inconsequential character that used to be part of royal life. Why are we having this from the BBC? And who is briefing them? Who is briefing them on this kind of interaction? Because I can tell you it ain't the King. It ain't the King. Who do you think it is? Johnny Thompson? Sue Hussey? Or another entity? I think we can all guess what's at work here. Well, that was the BBC's intimation. That was followed by the Telegraph, who elucidated further, claiming that the Harkles are going to speak again with the King after a call that did go ahead, marked a turning point in their relationship. Warm conversation, they say, was had with Harry. Then Meghan, passed over the phone to Pops. And a recording of the children singing Happy Birthday, Dear Grandpapa King. How sweet. Then we have the Express wading in. And they were rather contradictory, because first they confirmed at least the part about the grandchildren's video. And then they say that Harry did not speak to the King in an article a few hours later. So that seems to be a little bit conflicting. They say the King had a busy diary, no time for a private call, and is still waiting for an apology. Now, I want to say at this point, I've noticed online when I was looking at this story, Victoria Ward, who is a reporter for the Telegraph, is getting a lot of flack over the reporting of this story that he spoke to Meghan and the children. And if anybody is watching this that is out on social media slagging her off, I think that it is utterly unnecessary, very childish and very immature. And I have noticed that a lot of people, some from the UK, but also very many abroad, don't quite understand the way that our press works here. The Telegraph is a reputable publication. The Express, not so much these days, not so much at all. The Telegraph is. And Victoria Ward is doing her job. And because she's written a few fair-minded articles in the past that don't just totally and utterly trash the Harkles, there are people that look on, and what she's being described as part of the Harkle camp. And their people feed her information and that she is pro them. And it's just absolute bollocks. It's absolute bollocks. First of all, she was employed to do a specific job in royal reporting for the Telegraph. There was Camilla Tominey, who has a slightly different role there now. Then you had a few others coming forth, one of them being Victoria Ward. And if you look through a selection of the articles she's written, some of them, for example, from last week, was rather unfavourable to Harry. Prince Harry blocked from using leaked documents, the way she reported on that could have been presented in a much more glittering light towards Harry, because he sees last week's announcements regarding his lawsuit as a rather good and favourable thing, and a lot of publications have put it forth in that way, have put a spin on the legal proceedings with regards to his concerns over unlawful information gathering. They have presented what happened last week as a very positive sign for Harry. Victoria Ward didn't present it in quite the same way. And there is a general misunderstanding about the British press. When you have I'm not talking about tabloid trash here, but when you have a reputable or a reasonably reputable publication, such as the Telegraph, they see it as their duty, even if they have their, what you might call biases, their preferences towards a certain political bent. You know, the Telegraph is a right-wing newspaper. You have a responsibility as a publication of good repute to give fair coverage. So, for example, this week, in the wake of the Suella Braverman scandal that's going on, and all the job switching there, you have several articles, different contributors giving various opinions, some praising her for what she did, some very scathing about her, Suella Braverman, for what she did, because they credit their readers with having enough intelligence to want to see different versions of what's going on and not just be fed some kind of weird echo chamber. So, you know, I wanted to put that in because it is something that really disappoints about those who consider themselves royal fans. They don't do any favours screaming at her for being some kind of plant or having some kind of bias. She's a competent enough journalist doing her job. Do I know who fed her certain information, if it was right or wrong? No, I do not. But I am glad to say and pleased to say that in this kingdom we have publications such as the Telegraph, and there are several others, that don't simply slate other people and don't present a one-sided argument, but report what they know or what they believe to be true at the time. And on the subject of news and the relentless news cycle, I'm sure that some of you, like me, have been struggling, well, for the last few years really, but especially recently, again, with this relentless cycle of dismal news and grotesque global events that we seem to be bombarded with from all sides. And I thought that I would share with you a little passage that I picked up from a book that I've been reading. I might have shown you it in the past because I found this book at a local charity shop some months ago. It was only £2 or £3. And it was one of those books that I tell you about that I put away on the shelf and think one day, the time will come for it to be useful for me to pick it out and read it. And that time came. It sprang out at me. The book is The Man Who Created the Middle East by Christopher Simon Sykes, who was the grandson of Mark Sykes, who was involved, of course, with the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. That's when it was drawn up between French and British diplomats to determine the divide of the Ottoman Empire, which was collapsing, and leads us to the present day, the situation that we find ourselves in. It's also healthy for me to challenge my rose-tinted nostalgia. You know what I'm like, my dears. I'm full of rose-tinted nostalgia for a past that I never knew. That's the way it goes. I'm not so keen on this modern social media, interneted world with its smoking ban. Not my cup of tea, but it's healthy for me to challenge some of my understandings. And in part of this book, you see a lot of it is based on letters that Mark Sykes wrote when he was a young man, his childhood and beyond, during his years of education and his years of travels around the globe, because he was very well travelled. And it involves letters to his fiancée, very descriptive letters, full of illustration, this kind of thing. And he speaks in this passage, and you hear it a million times, but nothing is new under the sun, is it? I'm repeating this quote to you for those of you who, like me, are just finding yourselves miserable and sometimes feeling a bit misanthropic. A misanthrope is a person who dislikes mankind and avoids human society. So bear that in mind, because this was written around 1900, around the year 1900, maybe just before this particular passage, written by Mark Sykes in one of his letters. I quote, "A surly misanthropy begins to pervade my nature. I have never lacked bodily comfort and never experienced mental rest. For this reason I am misanthropic, yet how can one help it? The world is bad, vile, corrupt, and there is no remedy. Socialism is ridiculous, Anarchy is futile. Reforms bring no good, only stamp old evils to raise new. There is no utopia. Evil triumphs. Religion is dead. Honesty never existed. The whole world is a mass of individuals struggling for their own ends. Here you have a party, some ends are gained, and they break asunder and fall on one another, fighting, struggling, and the most noble calling of this vile race of mortals is the military, for it is for their mutual destruction. End of quote. Yeah, now we are on 125 years later, and those sentiments might resound, and in some quarters those sentiments will be being placed right now squarely on the shoulders of Mr. Sykes himself, who wrote this. He takes a lot of blame for what's going on now. That is why I'm educating myself on his history and what actually went on. It's important to do so. It's the same despair in humanity that he was relating to us 125 years ago, that the likes of me might relate to you now. And, the world population in 1900, in that time period, 1.6 billion. 1.6 billion. Now, in 2023, we've just surpassed 8 billion. Isn't it preposterous? And we only reached 7 billion in 2011, so in that 12 years, in the last 12 years, it's gone up another billion. I mean, it's sobering reading, isn't it? It's nuts. It's nuts. From 1.6 billion, I can't get over it, to 8 billion now. And I was looking down a table, a sort of list of many dates in history going back hundreds and thousands of years, and you see how scarcely populated this planet was until very recently. But just as the world population is swelling, the birth rate is collapsing. I was reading about the birth rate collapsing across nations for the developed world, and that in the 1960s here in Britain, British women were averaging 2.6 children. This was in the 60s. Now, fewer than 1.6. And last year, for the first time ever, half of women reached the age of 30 without having a child. And my understanding of this is that this will mean catastrophic potential consequences, if what I'm reading is to be believed, coming down the line in the not too distant future. Catastrophic potential consequences. I received a comment from Merle Dietrich saying, I live in the state of Minnesota, USA. Minnesota is almost as large as the United Kingdom. Our state population is around 6 million people. I was shocked to hear in your broadcast about Save England and the World, I was shocked to hear that the UK has a population of 67 million. Yes, it does. How can the UK bring in immigrants? The British government is wrong. Stand up, British people, raise your voices. Well, yes, I was speaking chiefly about illegal immigrants, those who don't really deserve or have the right for safe harbour here, but also for mass immigration at speed, not just all immigration. In general, there are authentic cases and cases of compassionate that mean that it should be acceptable to a certain extent, but not in the hundreds of thousands, as has been going on, especially with peoples that are inhospitable to this society itself and hate it and have a declared hatred for it and our ways. And all these voices, as we've been mentioning recently, have been totally and utterly ignored. People are betrayed, and it is hard not to feel defeated and helpless at times. We are a nation who held a referendum on Brexit, and that whole affair was totally bodged. The majority that Boris Johnson attained was totally and utterly wasted. And the simple fact is that no leader in recent memory, and of course they've all been Conservative because we've had a Conservative government, a Tory government for the last 13 years or whatever it is, none of them seems to actually want in their hearts what they promised to deliver. There are those that say that Boris Johnson himself wasn't even a Brexiteer at heart, that he was truly a Remainer, but he played that political card and won for all intents and purposes. But this applies to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, and now we have the reinstatement, or I should say the reintroduction of David Cameron, or Lord Cameron, our former Prime Minister. This is all the gossip here in the Kingdom this week. It's big, big news. David Cameron has been invited back to the Cabinet by Rishi Sunak and appointed Foreign Secretary and accepted a peerage to take the post. He replaces James Cleverly, and James Cleverly replaces Suella Braverman, who has been forced out of her role as Home Secretary, and she left a stinging letter of departure, which has made a lot of headlines. This is all the chatter this week. She's been accusing Rishi Sunak of many failings, including duplicity, betrayal and incompetency. And it made for rather fascinating reading. I'm not a huge fan of Suella Braverman. I don't actually know that much about Suella Braverman. My pick for the leader when the race came through was, as you might remember, Kemi Badenoch, even though I think she's a bit green around the gills and ideally needs a few more years experience, which she is now getting. She was the one that spoke to me as a sort of fresh pair of eyes with a strong set of principles that she seemed to believe in. So I have no special fondness for Suella, but her outrage expresses what many people who voted Conservative this time, which involves lots of Labour voters, lots of red, turned blue for the last election because they were so horrified by the woke-a-rama that was affecting this country and the immigration. So it's not just Conservatives that feel abandoned, but Conservatives do feel abandoned, and they feel that their leaders of their party are just not getting it. They hoped that Boris would. He didn't, despite his vast majority. Even he didn't get it and threw it away. They certainly never felt that Rishi would get it, what the silenced majority care about and what they support. And you might remember this was months ago now, but I never liked Rishi Sunak. I didn't want him leading the party. I was actually pleased that Liz Truss beat him. But when he took over the role, at least, as I've been saying the last few months, it felt like there was a grown-up back in the room. It felt like he's competent, was getting on with the job behind the scenes, and there was less immaturity. And that part of things I appreciated. But I find myself approving of Suella Braverman's disgust. She wrote to the Prime Minister, "Another cause for disappointment has been your failure to rise to the challenge posed by the increasingly vicious anti-Semitism and extremism displayed on our streets since Hamas's terrorist activities." Hear, hear. And if what she tells us about Sunak wheeling and dealing behind the scenes and making her false promises is true, then he is a snake. His smooth talk and his capabilities are all a waste if he is not a Conservative Prime Minister and politician. The majority, the historic majority that voted for this government, which by the time he was not the leader of when it was voted into power, nobody voted for him, they voted for Boris. But we were left with him. They were not voting in a Labour light version of conservatism. They were voting in a Conservative government, even if they had previously voted Labour. And it was actually a unique chance, a unique opportunity for the Conservative Party to win them over for good, because it picked up all types of people, all stripes of people, but many from the working classes of Labour, some of whom said that their ancestors would be horrified to find that they were now resorting to vote for a Conservative government. But they were doing it because it was a clarion call. This is what's obvious to the rest of us, but apparently not Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson. It was a clarion call for an end to this absurdity, this woke-a-rama drama, and this relentless immigration. Period. They were the main points. So whispering platitudes is not enough. This sort of leadership requires a staunch character. Where is Mrs. Thatcher when you need her? Where are you, Mrs. T? Please come back and tell us that the lady is not for turning. Please, my dear. I admire any leader, whether I love them or loathe them, that does what they say on the tin. That has a well-constructed vision built on strong foundations and wants to see it through. That's all I ask. Can they really not rustle someone up from somewhere in the Conservative Party? But this move from Rishi Sunak of bringing David Cameron back into the fold has not impressed me. I think it's a backwards, retrograde move. David Cameron oversaw years of decline as well. And I understand that he is praised for his deft diplomacy. He has a sure hand. He has a sort of reassuring presence to some. And I've got to say, this is separate from him as a politician or what's going on right now. I happen to know that he is a lovely, lovely man in very many ways. Quite charming, quite dishy, in fact, quite sexy, and actually really, really lovely. And I happen to know that as a fact. That aside, I'm not talking about that right now. We want vitality, we want new energy and a commitment to what was mandated. We don't want a Prime Minister from bygone days that lost his Brexit referenda. And I say this on the day that Rishi Sunak has apparently fulfilled his pledge to halve inflation. The inflation rate has fallen. It's the lowest it's been in 2 years, which is actually very good news for us here in the kingdom. 4.6% in October, which has eased from 6.7% inflation rates in September. So he's halved that headline rate, which was, he says, his first ambition of government. So perhaps he's competent in some areas, perhaps that was just luck, but repopulating his cabinet with centrists is not such a good idea. Conservative Party members want the Suellas, they want the Kemi Badenochs, those who are passionate about our national identity and respect traditional conservative values. And in the kingdom here, those kind of conservative values mean low tax, small state and free market. But a small state in particular, you know, instead we've got the spectacle of snaky Sunak rejoicing, as he's done this week, and telling us all about how they're ushering in a smoke-free generation, as if that's the most pressing issue of the day. Like, goody goody gumdrops. That's what annoys me about Sunak. He's like, goody goody gumdrops, save me when my bum pops. Oh, just imagine what he was like, wasn't he, at Winchester College? I don't know if he was head boy, but I'm sure he had that in him. Who knows? Oh, so popular. Oh, such a goody goody. All the good grades. But he'll dob you in if he catches you smoking behind the bike sheds. And on top of that, we hear today that the plan to send immigrants off to Rwanda has been squashed. So we can't even send them off to Rwanda. And by the way, I was reading about this. I hear the Home Office are delighted. They are delighted. And I was reading the notes from an insider at the Home Office who works at the Home Office, who said that it is the most furthest priority of the Home Office to quell all this immigration coming in. Everybody there in the Home Office and within London has no interest in protecting our borders, wants to keep them open really and let everybody come in. And if you bring up the subject, it's as if you've mentioned a dirty word. Well, all this talk that Rishi Sunak gives us is more sound bites. I'm going to stop the boats, stop the boats, stop the boats, stop the boats. That's what he keeps harping on about. He hasn't stopped the boats. And this brings me on to the subject of Stephen Yaxley Lennon, otherwise known as Tommy Robinson, a divisive character, and I'm not here to either praise or critique Tommy Robinson. What I will tell you is that I discovered a documentary of his that has apparently been banned, although it does exist on YouTube. I'm not going to link to it, but it can be found on YouTube. That's where it popped up to me. So if you were to type in "silenced by Tommy Robinson," if you scroll down, you'll find it at this moment in time, but it was actually banned due to some legal proceedings. And I've got to tell you, I found it utterly compelling. And it begins revolving around the case of a very young Syrian refugee who began school here in the United Kingdom. He was taken in, refugee, his family, I believe, was taken in, and there was some very distressing footage of him. The press described it as him being waterboarded. He was was he headbutted or maybe punched to the ground by some sort of large, burlier looking schoolboys. This was on a school playground, I think. They knocked him down and pouring water over his face. It was actually very distressing, and there was a real outcry at the time, and Piers Morgan was going mad and demanding retribution for the bully. And when this documentary started, I thought I'll give it a chance of 5 minutes. I had a little look and I saw that footage and I thought, please, Tommy Robinson, I'm happy to listen to you with an open mind, but you're not going to peel my leg and tell me it's ready. Don't tell me that there's a way of justifying that. I know what bullying behaviour looks like on the playground, and this Syrian boy looks terrified and traumatised. How can there possibly be an excuse for it? He presented one. He presented one that makes sense of the footage we saw that was quite disturbing. And I've got to say, there's always he said, she said 10 times for a story. It is compelling to watch. If you have time, it is a compelling watch. And it points to a tinderbox. A tinderbox that is going on at this moment in time when it comes to suppression, oppression, being gaslit, corruption, false narratives presented by the media, everybody colluding together. And actually Tommy Robinson's documentary was welcomed by the Danish Parliament and given a very emotional and very quite formal reception, a screening of this documentary. It was screened there, and they gave him a lot of respect. But the evidence of what he puts forward, which includes lots of clandestine recordings that were taken by hidden cameras, which is one of the reasons I think that it's been banned, and that he might be up for going to court over this. He managed to obtain compelling testimonies from the headmasters of the school, the teachers, various people from the local community who told the real story, or appeared to tell the real story, of what went on behind the scenes of that young Syrian refugee's life. And the consequence of a Conservative government ignoring the wishes of their electorate to behave as Conservatives. That will is being totally ignored, and it's only natural that people who even lean an inch to the right, I'm not even speaking about those on the far right, but those who lean an inch to the right or are Conservative with a small c or a large c, they begin moving further to the right and being drawn to other voices that speak for them, in social media, for example. The likes of Doug Murray or, Constantine Kissin from Trigonometry, Lawrence Fox, characters like that, Nigel Farage, it moves people who might normally not even be so attracted to those types of characters. It moves them over that, looking for different options, wishing that they had another party to vote for, looking for people who will tell them some unvarnished truths, not be afraid of facing unvarnished truths, and sharing a sense of outrage. Well, that's quite enough of me getting my tiara in a twist. I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast, my dears. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. I appreciate your company. Take care, my dears, and toodle pip.